Dennis Spooner was a veteran British TV writer, and he joined the Doctor Who team in the back half of this first season, going on to write stories for the first 3 seasons, officially. Technically he returned for a story in season 4, but we'll get to that. His first story here was originally supposed to be the first story of season 2, however it was pushed forward at short notice, most likely due to scheduling problems of some kind. Out of the 6 episodes in this serial, episodes 4 and 5 are missing, yet thankfully the BBC commissioned an animation for the 2013 DVD release. Our story begins with the TARDIS landing and what the Doctor is insistent is 1963. He's still a bit pissed at Ian for what he said at the end of the last story, however both Ian and Barbara managed to calm him down long enough to explore and find out that it's not 1963, it's 1794. So close. It's also France during the Reign of Terror, when Robespierre was in charge. They find themselves in a nearby farmhouse, and while the Doctor looks upstairs, Ian, Barbara and Susan get captured by 2 counter-revolutionist soldiers, who question them on whether they are revolutionists or counter-revolutionists. Obviously they're neither, but they catch the crew lying when they try to claim they're alone, even though they already found the Doctor and knocked him out. Suddenly the revolutionist soldiers show up and kill the 2 counter-revolutionists. They assume the crew are also counter-revolutionists, and then they capture Ian, Susan and Barbara to be executed. They also set the farmhouse on fire as the Doctor is still passed out from when the other soldiers found him earlier. And this is one of my favourite cliffhangers of the first season. I love Ian's look of realisation that if the Doctor dies, they are trapped in 1794 France until they meet the guillotine. The trio are put in prison with Barbara and Susan in one cell and Ian in another.
It's very lonely in here sometimes. Very lonely indeed. Now, if we were to be friends...
Nothing like a bit of family-friendly sexual harassment in my 60s TV. While that's going on, the Doctor obviously isn't dead, and is rescued by a young boy, the same young boy that Ian encountered earlier, who told them where they were. He informs the Doctor that his companions have been taken to Paris, and the Doctor begins the 12-kilometre walk to prevent their execution. Meanwhile, Barbara begins planning an escape as Ian gets a cellmate by the name of Webster. Unfortunately, he's been injured severely and doesn't have long to live. With his dying breath, he tells Ian to look for an Englishman named James Stirling, who's a spy with important information, and he needs to return to England ASAP, as this information will help in the coming war between England and France. A man named Jules Renan will help him locate Stirling. Ian promises to do so, and Webster dies. The Doctor gets his own little side quest, encountering a chain gang digging into the ground. He ends up getting in an argument with the man in charge of the gang and is forced to join in on the digging. Now the Doctor, being the Doctor, devises a plan where he steals some money from the man in charge, pretends to find it while digging, and then knocks him out when he starts digging for some fake treasure himself, setting the whole chain gang free. Barbara and Susan's escape effort doesn't go well, and they end up letting some rats in, which leads to Susan breaking down. Also, Ian is visited in his cell by Lemaitre, who questions Ian about Webster's death, and if he said anything that could be useful to their cause. Ian claims Webster was silent, and Lemaitre pretends to believe him, taking him off of the execution list. Barbara and Susan aren't so lucky though, and Ian watches through his cell window as they're taken away to the guillotine. They don't quite make it that far though, as they are rescued by Jules Renan and his old buddy Jean. Back at the jail, Ian manages to find a way to escape when the jailer is distracted by Lemaitre, leaving his keys in the door, giving Ian enough time to take the key off the keyring and placing it back in the lock before he returns. The Doctor finally reaches Paris and decides it's time for a costume change, visiting a local clothes store to trade both of his current wear and his iconic ring for the uniform of a regional officer of the provinces. Ian escapes from the prison, but Lemaitre watches on, theorising that he may now finally get the truth about Webster from Ian. Barbara and Susan are taken back to the hideout of Jules and Jean, who reveal themselves to be counter-revolutionists. They actually knew the 2 men who initially captured the crew before they were killed. Jules and Jean tell them that they'll be safe there and will be shipped out of France at the first chance. However, Barbara and Susan refuse to go without Ian and the Doctor, so Jules and Jean make it their mission to reunite the TARDIS crew. They have a feeling that due to the deaths of their 2 men that there's a traitor in their midst, giving their locations away to the revolutionists. Susan suddenly falls ill as Leon arrives, making Barbara swoon. Leon is a friend of Jules and Jean, and Barbara shares a very flirty conversation with him. And this is going to lead to nowhere. The Doctor finds the jailhouse a little too late, as everyone's escaped by now. There he meets Lemaitre, who invites the Doctor to meet Robespierre to report on the goings-on in his province. After they leave, the clothes store owner from earlier meets with the jailer, showing him the Doctor's ring, outing him as a liar. Now the Doctor's meeting with we're animated now. The Doctor's meeting with Robespierre goes well, although the Doctor surprisingly can't really get a word in edgewise. Susan continues to be unwell as Leon offers to find a doctor. That's a doctor, not the Doctor. Barbara and Susan are left alone while Jules and Jean visit one of their many hideouts, discovering Ian. However, they don't know who Ian is yet, so they knock him out and kidnap him. The Doctor is forced to stay in the jail for the night at the insistence of Lemaitre, who is aware that the Doctor is actually faking, thanks to that annoying shop owner again. Can this guy stop ruining all the fun already? He seems to go away finally when Lemaitre rewards him with a bag of gold, taking the Doctor's original clothes and ring back. Ian awakens back at Jules and Jean's, reuniting with Barbara. Finally, Ian can tell Jules to help him find Sterling.
Sterling. No, I'm afraid that name means nothing to me either.
It's never that easy, is it? Jules tells him to ask Leon. He might have more of an idea. Also, apparently the doctor that Leon found won't come to them, so Barbara now has to take Susan to him herself. Now, of course, this sounds sketchy. That's because it is. The Doctor is actually a spy, and Barbara and Susan are rearrested and placed right next to their Doctor, the Doctor. In fact, Lemaitre lets the Doctor interrogate Barbara, not cluing the Doctor in that he's figured him out already. Instead, he listens in on their conversation for information, finding out where Jules' hideout is when Barbara tells the Doctor. Ian goes to meet Leon at an old crypt, and as Leon steps out of the shadows, so do the revolutionist soldiers, revealing Leon as the traitor. Yes, it's a trap, as Leon is certain Ian is involved with Jules, although Ian tries to beg to differ. Back at the jailhouse, the Doctor convinces the jailer to set Barbara free so he can follow her back to the secret hideout of the counter-revolutionists. The jailer is stupid enough to let this happen, so the Doctor tries his hand again with the jailer's intelligence level, trying to get him to free Susan for the same reason as Barbara, but this is too much for the jailer and he decides not to do it. Jules returns home to find no Barbara and no Ian. He puts two and two together and heads to the crypt to save Ian, killing Leon and the other soldiers in the process. Robespierre meets with Lemaitre, with Robespierre theorising that his deputy officer Barras is planning to betray him, overthrow him and put someone else in his place. He tells Lemaitre to follow Barras to a secret meeting point to find out what's really going on. Ian and Jules meet back with Barbara, who finds out that Leon has been killed, visibly upset that Leon's death is being treated as something to celebrate when she knew another side to him thanks to their earlier conversation. Ian and Jules don't really get why, as it was either Leon or Ian, but both sides kinda have a point here, it's a tough one. Ian also finds out about the Doctor's antics through Barbara, bringing him amusement. The Doctor comes up with another plan to pretend that Susan has escaped, which does work and the jailer is knocked unconscious as Susan and the Doctor escape. They don't get too far though, as Lemaitre returns, revealing that he knows the truth to the Doctor and blackmails the Doctor to take him to Jules' safe house or he'll kill Susan. He does so, and Jules declares the Doctor a traitor. There's clearly more going on here, which comes to fruition as Lemaitre reveals himself to actually be James Sterling. Ian finally passes on the message to him, but Sterling is confused. He was expecting a little more with the message, as he'd already planned to leave France in the very near future. After a quick recollection session, Ian remembers that Webster did mumble something under his breath before his message, mentioning both Deputy Barras and a meeting at something called the Sinking Ship. Turns out that's the name of a nearby inn, and Sterling realises that's where the secret meeting is taking place, which Robespierre told him about. Barras is conspiring alright, and he plans to meet with the new ruler of France. In the end, Jules, Ian and Barbara go to listen in on the meeting, as Sterling needs to keep up appearances. They go undercover, pretending to be the owners of the inn, as Barras arrives, shortly followed by a masked man. Ian is prepared for the meeting, drilling a hole in the wall to be able to see and listen in. The masked man removes his covering to reveal...
Barbara, it's Napoleon. Napoleon Bonaparte.
Napoleon is encouraged to overthrow Robespierre, ushering in a new era for France. The crew return to Sterling as Jules and Sterling aren't pleased at this news. They know a rule under Napoleon would be more like a dictatorship and that things are actually better under Robespierre at the moment, at least if that's the alternative. Sterling takes Ian to try and stop Napoleon's attempt, but they are too late as Robespierre is shot in the jaw and taken to be executed. The Doctor takes this time to return to the jail where Susan is still being held, scaring the jailer with the prospect of being arrested now that Lemaitre is revealed to be a traitor. Thankfully, the jailer is stupid enough to believe the Doctor as Sterling is still very much undetected. He makes a deal with the jailer to house the newly captured traitors in his cell, setting Susan free in the process to have more room, and he won't have the jailer arrested. The jailer agrees as Robespierre is brought into the jailhouse in preparation for his execution. The crew manage to reunite and escape Paris with the help of Jules and Jean, who decide they will now lie low following Robespierre's reign coming to an abrupt end. The crew return to the TARDIS exhausted from their long adventure. The Doctor is optimistic at the future travels they'll all have, now forgetting all about his little tantrum with Ian at the start of the story. And we end on a shot of the stars. Very poignant. I love this story, it's one of my absolute favourites of the First Doctor's tenure. I know, a complete 180 from the Sensorites, but the Reign of Terror is full of espionage, spy-like plot twists, and a fuck ton of suspense and great cliffhangers, which are all up my alley. It keeps a steady pace too, which is quite the achievement for the time. The Sensorites dragged on, hell even Marco Polo overstayed its welcome a little bit, but the Reign of Terror is perfectly paced to me. Seriously, even the obvious padding with the Doctor's chain gang arc in episode 2 didn't feel like padding. It's Literally just the Doctor walking around while goofy music plays in the background and he gets up to shenanigans, and it just works. It's so clearly a B-plot, but it doesn't feel like a chore to watch at all. Now, the animated episodes take some time to get used to, as this is our first one of the show's run. At first, it doesn't look great, and it really doesn't help that within the first 5 minutes, Barbara goes full Pingu. However, after a while, it really grew on me. It's quite detailed, and I prefer my missing episode animations to be grounded, much like the original broadcast. Call me a purist, I guess, but this isn't a bad alternative. Unfortunately, it's not the main animation style that's stuck, but I'll take it while we have it, especially now that the next animated episode will get us in Season 3, so it's more than enough time for a style reset. One thing that really showed me how dedicated they were to having overarching storylines and character developments was the small conversation that Barbara and the Doctor have in episode 6. Barbara begins to accept that she won't be able to save Robespierre, a reminder of her character arc during the last historic story of the Aztecs. It's impressive consistency for the time, and a great attention to detail. In fact, Ian and Barbara get quite a lot to do in this story, what with Ian's whole message mission and Barbara's brief flirtation with Leon. One thing that sticks out like a sore thumb here is Susan. She spends the majority of the story captured or ill, with almost no mention of any previous character arcs, or even a hint of future involvement. Now, seriously, I know she's the younger character, but surely there's something for her to do here? I can't really think of what that involvement might be, but that reinforces the genuine difficulty that the writers were having with her character. Now, initially it was William Russell, who played Ian, that suggested a story set in the French Revolution to the writing team, and the idea did come to fruition after a David Whittaker story set in the time of the Spanish Armada was scrapped. Another quick thing to mention is that William Russell had a holiday during the weeks shooting episode 2 and 3, so you may notice that all of his scenes for these are pre-recorded using different cameras. Jules and Jean were nice additions, making quite the iconic pair for most of the story. However, you may have noticed during the story that I stopped mentioning Jean in the later stages. Yeah, he does a Captain Maitland from last story and just dips after episode 4 with no mention of where his character is or what happens to him. Jules takes over the role of his character and Jean's for the last 2 episodes. It's a very ambitious historical story with lots of different side characters, so I'm not too surprised with this one. I mean, talking about side characters, let's talk about Napoleon's sudden appearance in the final episode. As discussed in previous stories, these are meant to be partly educational, and I'll be honest, I learned more about the French Revolution watching this story than I ever learned in school. In fact, I don't even think I learned about the French Revolution in school. Season 1 of Doctor Who is a lot more impressive than you may first think. Although the first story drags a little bit, it quickly finds its footing with the run between the Daleks and the Aztecs, with the only outlier being Keys and Marinus, which struggled with trying to keep up with itself. It takes a dip with the Sensorites, which, fuck it, I'll just declare it now since we all know it's coming. My least favourite story of this season is the Sensorites. I mean, look how long it took me to make the video. Yeah, that's a good excuse. No, seriously, it has some highlights, but most of it is spent listening to those annoying attempts at diplomatic Daleks. The season finishes with the Reign of Terror, which we just discussed, and while it was really tough to choose between the Daleks and this one, I eventually picked the Reign of Terror to be my favourite story of the season. The Daleks suffers from being just one episode too long, I think, while Reign of Terror finds the perfect amount of episodes for its story. A testament to Dennis Spooner's writing, I suppose. Going through the characters, we'll start with Susan. If I've ever seen a character that has no potential to become an iconic mainstay of the show, it's Susan. It's ironic because she should be the most interesting companion of the bunch. She's the Doctor's granddaughter. Okay, we don't know much about who the Doctor is yet, neither did the writing team, but surely they realise that whatever powers they give the Doctor, she can have too? I mean, they do recognise this in the Sensorites with the telepathic abilities, but now that I think about it, if she can do everything the Doctor does, it kinda makes his character irrelevant. But no, they bring in another Time Lord companion later on during the 4th Doctor's tenure, and that works for the most part, so like a lot of the Sensorites, it was just too ahead of its time to work properly. She spends most of the first season getting into trouble and just being a general nuisance. It's a shame because Carol Ann Ford is actually pretty good acting-wise for the most part, especially considering she was only 23 and had only worked as bit parts on British TV previously. I'll speak more about why I think she deserved better in the next season when it's more appropriate. Barbara is the history buff, meaning that most of her development is spent coming to terms with actually taking part in the history that she's taught. This later registers as frustration that she can witness history but not be allowed to take part in actively trying to change it. She later accepts this and takes comfort in the notion that she's saved some lives during their adventures. Coupling her with Ian, Barbara works in the team due to her historic knowledge, which lends to the education aspect of those stories. It does mean that her involvement is lacking in the science fiction stories, with her not even taking part in half of the Sensorites because they clearly had nothing for her. That's where Ian comes in. Initially intended to be Barbara's counterpart for the sci-fi stories, being that he's a science teacher, I find that he doesn't do much science. He does mention chemical formulas very briefly in Keys of Marinus, but that's about it, not counting the classroom scenes in the very first episode. In fact, Ian is clearly the muscle for most of the season. He usually gets his own side quest, which eventually ties into the main story, like Kramer in Seinfeld. Whether he's fighting Aztecs or delivering secret messages, Ian gets a lot more to do than the other two companions. Not only due to being the muscle, but he also shows his brains too at times, coming up with quite a lot of the crew's plans to get back to the TARDIS. This is most likely due to the time period. We do get female companions that can hold their own. I'd actually argue Barbara is one of those, but for right now, it's 1963 and the smell of testosterone has never been so overbearing. The Doctor is by far the most interesting of the characters. Watching this 62 years later, I know what the Doctor becomes. I know the many incarnations and I know the history, and one of the things to treasure about this season the most is the writing team slowly but surely figuring out the Doctor's character. He almost plays an antagonist in the first story when he kidnaps Ian and Barbara and takes them to the Stone Age, but by the Reign of Terror he's the Doctor we know. He's the blueprint. He's got the humour, the temper, the intelligence, and that just familiar, lovable nature about him. He's the smartest life form in the room, and he knows it. And they play the alien angle very discreetly here, and do so for most of Hartnell's run. It's not until Troughton and Pertwee where the more iconic parts of the Doctor's character come into play, but it's a grounded start. Let's keep in mind the whole thing was done on a shoestring budget, with a production schedule the likes of which would make the Grey's Anatomy cast faint. The level of storytelling achieved for those crutches is astounding. The black sheep is obviously Marco Polo, as we can't really see it. If it existed, things might have gone differently with my favourite story, as there were a lot of parts to Marco Polo that I really enjoyed, but alas, it's not to be. Moving on from this, the show is now established. The fresh season allows for a reset, and the cast of characters are familiar to the viewer. But with Season 2 comes numerous changes, and also a shockingly low amount of missing episodes. It's one to stick around for, folks, and I hope you do so.